Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all of you. It's a wonderful night to be together for a great cause, the pro-life cause. And it's foundational to what we believe as Christians, what we believe as Americans, what we believe as humans. It's a grand night to be here to defend life. Without life, nothing else matters. Let's pray together. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, send your holy anointing upon Jay Watts this evening. Pour your Spirit upon him. Give him wisdom. Give him strength. Give him all the graces that he needs to be your prophet this evening. Pour your grace upon each of us. Open our hearts to his message. Prepare us to be also apostles for this pro-life message. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. And now Dr. John Loesch will introduce our speaker, Jay Watts.
Thank you, Father. Thank you all for coming. This is great. It's a great turnout. I think you're all going to be very pleased by the end of the night. We have a fantastic speaker. I've heard him speak on a number of occasions. Just recently, he was traveling through Minnesota, and he's from Georgia. He was traveling through Minnesota, and I got wind of it, and so I reached out to him, and he was graciously agreed to help us. I want to thank also the folks at Epiphany. I want to thank the Father Riser Knights of Columbus Council. And, I just would like to say, as the pro-life community negotiates the post-Roe world, I think, we're struggling in some ways to get the answer. And I think you're going to really find that Mr. Watts' message resonates, and I think it's going to be right on target for where we want to head in the post-Roe world. Mr. Watts is a well-known, a nationally recognized speaker. He's the founder and CEO of Merely Human Ministries, which is committed to helping Christians and people who hold pro-life views to graciously defend the intrinsic dignity of all human life in a positive, impactful, and gospel-inspired manner. So without further ado, I'd like you to please give a warm Minnesota welcome to our speaker, Mr. Jay Watts.
Good. I am so grateful for the turnout tonight. If it were this cold in Georgia, you couldn't get 10 people to show up anywhere. I know this is just normal for you guys. I've been asked multiple times if this is my first time in Minnesota. It is not. Last year, I was in the western part of Minnesota where I flew into Fargo, and I had the privilege of seeing, and I don't know how many of y'all are aware of this, but in Minnesota, you have the largest pelican statue in the world in Pelican Falls, Minnesota. And I stopped. I was told this because I was speaking twice on that part. So the day between, I stopped in there and had my picture taken with it. I love things like that all over the United States, getting the opportunity. Last night when I flew in yesterday and was just met with a brutal cold that I have never felt before. Even in Georgia right now, we thought it was cold. And then I called my wife when I got here and I said, honey, the Mississippi River is frozen. I have never seen anything like this in my life. Water just doesn't freeze in Georgia. I mean, we get snow like every 10 years of any amount whatsoever. But the idea that bodies of water freeze over is completely alien to us. And then when I got back last night, there's a movie. I don't know how many of you have seen this movie. It really is one of my favorite movies, and I know I'm going to sound stupid for saying this, but it's just a friendly, lovely movie. It's a movie called Free Guy. And Free Guy was on in my hotel room when I got back. And so I'm watching it and just remembering, Free Guy is about a video game character, is what's called a non-playing character. So they're NPCs. They don't matter in the game. But this one becomes, through a series of events, the first AI. He has consciousness and awareness, hopes, dreams, and desires. He becomes an individual. And as other NPCs within the game start to have the same thing happen to them, the malevolent force, the antagonist of the movie, decides to destroy them. And in the process of trying to destroy them, two of them, Guy, who is the main character, and his best friend, Buddy, are trying to race to save them. And at one point, they're getting separated, and Buddy is encouraging Guy to go on. And he tells Guy, you have to go on. You have to show them that we matter. That's what I ask audiences who are pro-life, the charge that I give them to take on. It is our duty, it is our responsibility, it is our privilege to try to show the world that the unborn matter. There has never been a group of there's never been a category of human life that was so perfect to be victimized like the unborn. Unlike any other group before them, they cannot stand up for themselves. They cannot scream out their own humanity. They rely on the goodwill, conscience, and moral correctness of other people to stand up for them. And so in this world, and particularly now, there was so much celebration at the post-Roe moment. At the moment that Roe falls, so many people were celebrating. And friends of mine came to me and said, you seem more subdued than a lot of other people. You're not outwardly expressing yourself. I said, look, it's a great moment. I've been part of the force fighting for this moment in most of my adult life now, as after transitioning from being out of the world that I lived in as far as corporate world into ministry. I said, but the pushback's going to be hard. The other side is going to fight back so hard. And before, what you did didn't matter. I don't mean to be rude, but it was very hard for you to make a difference because it was a national issue. And it was being fought out in courts and in Congress and the executive branch. But now that Roe has fallen, we live in an environment where the ability for you to convince your neighbor of the rightness of the pro-life view might actually change your community. It went from being something so distant and huge and difficult to imagine to something that now has to be argued out in our neighborhoods, in our homes, in the restaurants around us, in our churches, everywhere we have the opportunity to engage this issue. And so it's time for those of us who believe in the full humanity of the unborn to equip ourselves to be able to have a reasonable conversation with our neighbors in the hopes that not just the pro-life view will change, but that we may win people to our side so that they might live in accordance with the truth, which will be better for them. I was once a pro-choice atheist. I was on the other side of this, so I know what it feels like to live outside of the truth. And I know what it feels like to live within it. And so if you're looking to understand why I do what I do, that in a nutshell is your answer. I take great joy in knowing Christ. And I want other people to have that opportunity. It is better to love my neighbor as myself than it is to refrain from any unnecessary shows of concern for the people around me or to be too cool to care about what's going on in the world. I want to honor God by loving my neighbor as myself. And so that, in a nutshell, is what I do for a living. I try to help people, equip them to talk about what is inarguably the greatest moral issue of our age when you talk about the human cost involved in it. So how do we do this? How do we engage this issue at a time where our engagement can be so meaningful? And that's an encouragement for everyone here. We can change our communities by having a voice within them for truth. So I have a couple of ground rules that I came up with. I came up with these last year. Really, I was invited to speak somewhere. Audience has changed. I've been talking to people all day, and one of the things that I told people, it's important for us to be able to know the people that we're talking to as best we can before we get there, because the message needs to connect with you. I can't just be a performing monkey. I have to have some service to the audience that I'm talking to. And I realized last year that as we've moved places, or moved on in life, one of the first things we need to do is to equip people not just to have the argument, to feel like they're ready to argue. And when I mean argue, I say it in the best sense. Now, I'm good at arguing. That's why I have the job that I have. How many people in this, by show of hands, how many people in this room like to argue? Raise your hand. All right, you might be surprised. A much smaller number of people than I had with the high schoolers this morning. Apparently the high schoolers like to argue more than you do. All right, how many of you like to win arguments? Raise your hand. All right, there's far more of you who like to win arguments who like to argue. Right, I would tell you, by the way, that I don't know that I love arguments. I would say that I'm incapable of staying out of them. And I feel like God has used that to great effect in my life once he tamed me and pointed me in the right direction. So the people who raise their hand and says they like to win arguments and that did not raise their hand and said they like to argue, and the people that didn't raise their hands, you're liars. You don't like to lose arguments. Nobody likes to lose an argument. We all would like to be equipped to win. So when we're talking about something here, I want to walk away having made you feel better about your ability to engage this issue. The first ground rule that I want to offer you is this. The only way for any of us to fail is to say nothing. That is the only way to fail, which means you are free to be bad at arguing. If what you are arguing with other people is that they ought to treat every other human being with dignity and respect. If someone says something and you interject and say, may I say something for a moment, and what you do is defend the equal dignity of all human life, and they beat your socks off in front of everyone, you have still succeeded because you had the courage to say something. The only way that we fail, and in this world, the greatest pressure you will ever feel on the issue that we're discussing right now is to keep your opinion to yourself. Don't hurt their feelings, don't upset them, don't interject your beliefs into the lives of others. Just be quiet when it comes to this issue. You have no right to talk. Nonsense. You can only fail if you fail to speak up. So be encouraged, and you're going to be better. If you're not an arguer and you decide to get into this discussion with people, you're going to be terrible at first. It's okay, you're supposed to be. At first. When I teach, when I'm at home, one of the things I think is interesting, for years I would travel all over the United States and a little bit around the world, and this was how people knew me. But when I go home, I didn't do this, and I just coached my kids in sports. And my favorite sport to coach by far is lacrosse, and my family went all in on lacrosse, and all my kids played it, and so I learned how to be a good lacrosse coach. And the first thing I would tell, lacrosse is an intensely complicated game that requires a lot in the skill set for people to be able to master. And I would tell the kids the first day that they would show up, I want you to be encouraged. This is the worst you will ever be at lacrosse in your life. Day one, you're supposed to be bad all day at this. Do not feel bad if you're not good at lacrosse today. If you're not better in a year, then we'll start to talk. If you're still terrible after playing for a long time, then we'll be concerned. But day one, the first time we do this, we're going to be bad. And it's the same way of entering in discussions like this. You're going to feel awkward. You're going to feel weird. It's okay. You'll get better if you just keep discussing it, if you just keep bringing it up. And that's our job. Our job in a world that would us rather shut up is to just keep talking about the equal dignity of human life. And it's knowing that the only way that we can fail at this is to say nothing. Okay, the number two thing that I want as far as the ground rules is to remember why we're arguing. And I mentioned this already a little bit earlier. The truth takes a long time to land when we're talking to people. And so we have to be sure that when we're talking, we don't make the landing take longer by being a jerk. Because if you're ugly in a conversation, if you're ugly in an argument with somebody and you want to convince them of something, I promise you, having been on the other side of this, there are times where somebody's talking to me, I was like, I will not agree with them no matter what because I am so sick of them. And I have never, in all of my time in arguments and all of the things that I've done, look at another human being that I'm talking to and think of them as my enemy, as my ally, as somebody to be defeated. I've never actually concerned myself with winning arguments at all. What I have concerned myself with is winning people with good arguments. And it's going to be easy. So my second point is to be calm in arguments because you're right. And arguing is much easier when you're right. People ask me that all the time, say, how come you guys do so well in debates? You go to colleges and universities and you have these public debates and your side always does so well. And I said, well, it's easy because we're right. And when you have the truth on your side, debating is very easy. It is so hard to argue when you're wrong. I don't know if any of you have ever staked out a wrong position and then decided to try to defend it, but it is just a horrifying experience because the truth just comes against you over and over and over again, and you're dodging and you're weaving and you're trying to change the subject. But when you're right, it just flows. And because of that, you can just be calm while you're having this conversation. And remember, I said, be calm, number one, because you're right, so the conversation will go easier. Also be calm because when you're having a discussion with somebody, they reflect your emotions. And you can help them get to a healthy place. I cannot tell you how many times I've had people who hate me, and they're expressing how much they hate me, and I'll tell them, can we just take a step back? I would like to have a respectful conversation. Let's just take a deep breath and make sure that we're engaging in a respectful and productive way. And they mirror that response. I don't give them hate for their hate. I don't give them anger for their anger. They don't get to control me like that. What they get back from me is the grace and mercy of Jesus. And if I can't control myself, I will pull myself out of a conversation. I will say, I need to step back until I get control of it. If I felt like myself, I'm like getting, but I don't usually. I'm pretty good at it. Enough so, by the way, that one time my son, who's now just about to graduate from college and go to law school, but he was younger back then, he went on a trip with me, and he watched a Q&A, and all these people were coming after me. And after it was over, he was like, Dad, he told me, Dad, that was remarkable. I felt really good for a second. I'm like, thanks, son, I appreciate that. He said, why are you so much nicer to them when they're wrong than you are to me? He's like, when we're wrong around the house, you just hammer us. But up there, those people were saying the craziest things, and you just acted like everything was such a great question. See, because the people that I'm talking to are going to mirror the emotions that I give them. And if they try to take me to a negative emotional space, I won't let them. And I mentioned a second ago that it takes a while for the truth to land. I will say this. The person that was most responsible for me moving from atheism into Christianity, I didn't talk to them for more than a year from the last time I talked to the time that I became a Christian. That's how long it took for the arguments, the discussions, their character witness, all of that stuff to start to take effect on me. Over a year of no communication with them. They would have had no idea of the impact that they had on my life if they were trying to judge it by the last conversation they had with me. I was angry, I was irritated, I was insulting, and it didn't matter. They kept their cool. They represented with grace and mercy the kingdom of Christ. And then a year later, the weight of the evidence of everything that I saw finally collapsed in on me, and I accepted Christ. But they could have never known what was going on that day. So don't feel a sense of urgency or need to convince people at that moment to say that you're right. Make sure that you say what you want to say and then end the conversation respectfully. I had a conversation with a young lady at UGA, and she would say I was entirely pro-life, but she took exception with rape, and she said that women ought to be allowed to get abortions on the issue of rape. And she and I talked for a long. It's like she made her case, I made mine. She started to make her case again. I kind of summed mine up again. She started to talk again. And I said, young lady, I feel like you've heard me, and I heard and understand you. And I don't think it's going to be productive for you and I to keep saying the same thing back and forth to each other. So instead of saying it again, I'm going to ask for this. Respectfully, will you just consider what I've said? And I promise you, I will think about what you've said to me. And she said, I don't think you understand my point of view. And I said, okay, here's what I understand your point of view is. And I repeated it back to her. And at that moment, she looked at me stunned, and she said, yes, that's exactly what I believe. I said, yeah, I understand you perfectly. I just disagree with you. I said, I think you understand me at this point. And I'm okay with you disagreeing with me if you will just walk away and promise to think about what I've said. And I'll keep what you've said fresh in my mind and give them time to change their minds. Most people's ideas like this, they hold very personally. It's more than just something they believe, it's who they are. And so at that moment that you're having that conversation with them and you're telling them wrong, they don't hear you're wrong about this. They hear I'm wrong as a person. And so you have to graciously give them the room to have that change between them and God and the truth and just get out of the way. And so we need to stay calm knowing that we're right, knowing that they're going to reflect our energy back towards us. And in these conversations, when we've said what we have to say, just get out of them. And let the truth do its work. It's so much stronger than us anyway. It will work long after we've stopped talking and much better. We're just going to more likely than not muck things up if we keep talking and talking and talking. And then the last thing I want to say is, as far as a ground rule, is the argument is that abortion is wrong because it unjustly takes the life of an innocent human being, and that's a moral claim. We're having a moral discussion. Why does that have to be a ground rule point as we're having this? Because you live in a world that is dominated and governed by its emotions. People feel everything, and they think that their feelings are really important. And sometimes maybe those feelings have a place. But when we're talking about whether or not abortion is a great moral evil or not, that all depends on how we answer the question, what is the embryo? What is the fetus? What is the unborn? Is it one of us? And the answer to that question is done external to ourselves. And our emotions or feelings simply have no place in this discussion. There was one of the things I like to tell people that I think it may interest you as an audience. You may want to know this. I'm sure the Father can verify this if he's talking. We see all of you when we're talking. I notice that audiences sometimes think that there's some protection from them and we don't see you sleeping or talking to other people or not paying attention. We see all of it. And I particularly see when people hate me. And I don't care. Most places where I speak in places where the majority of people disagree with what I'm saying, sometimes very angry. And because I know there's a Q&A coming up, I actually like their hate in the sense of I see them getting angry. You know what it means if somebody's getting angry about what I'm saying? It means they're hearing me. It means they're listening. And if they don't like it, it means they're my target audience. So the more they hate me, the more I engage with them and make sure I'm checked. There was this young lady one time in San Francisco. That young lady has hated me more than any human being has ever hated me in my life. The whole time I was talking, she was looking at me as if she felt like her staring at me may be able to kill me. And I loved it. I just kept checking in with her when I was talking because at the end of the talk, just like tonight, by the way, you'll have a chance to ask me questions when this is over. There's going to be a Q&A. And I was like, okay, she is so animated. When we open up the mic, she's coming up and she's going to say something awesome. And so when I got done, I said, okay, now the microphones are open. You're welcome to come forward. She shot up and came running down so that she could be the first. And I was so excited about what was coming. I was like, this is going to be so good. And she got to the mic and she said, Mr. Watts, if you don't like abortion, then have nothing to do with it. But just leave it alone for the rest of us. And I thought to myself, my goodness, what a depressing waste of hate. It's like, young lady, I never said I don't like abortion. I said abortion is wrong. And those are two entirely different statements. If you look over on this table, you will see I have been graciously provided Reese's peanut butter cups because they are my favorite candy to eat in the world. And because also, incidentally, they've kindly given them to me because I haven't eaten all day except for a couple of apples. And so I'm really hungry, and that was the fuel they gave me to get through, and that's beautiful because I love Reese's peanut butter cups. I love Coca-Cola. I think Coca-Cola is God's most perfect liquid. I think Pepsi is a vile, disgusting swill that ought to be expunged from the human experience. And my feelings about that, my taste, had nothing to do with anybody else. I was speaking in Maine, and I was at this they put me up in this tiny little privately owned hotel. It was lovely, a little hotel. But every machine they had, and he had a surprising number of machines for such a small place, and they were all filled with Pepsi products. So I went to the guy and said, do you own this motel? And he says, yes, I do. Privately owned? He said, yes. Do you own those machines? He said, yes, I do. I said, so you're in charge of what y'all stock in those machines, correct? And he said, yes, I am. I said, well, why don't one machine have Coke products? Just one, just a couple in there. And he said, why would I do that? I said, because I like Coke. And he said, I don't care, you're leaving tomorrow. What do I care what you like? And that's a perfectly reasonable response. What I like has nothing to do with what he likes, and my likes and preferences have nothing to do with forming his own. But we're talking about moral claims. When we say things like child abuse is wrong, when we say things like rape is wrong, when we say murder is wrong, we're not making preference claims. We're making objective moral claims to the wrong for all people at all times. You may like or not like Coke. You may like or not like Reese's peanut butter cups. But you don't get to choose to like or not like rape, murder, child abuse. Those are objective moral wrongs, and we talk about them in a different category altogether. So when I was in Tennessee and this one young woman stood up, she was really feeling herself at that moment. And she walked up to the mic, and in front of her whole school, which was a sizable school, and in her most passionate voice, declared in front of everyone, what you, sir, offended me with what you just said. I found that offensive. She was shocked when I very calmly looked back at her and said, so? She said, what do you mean so? I was like, what do I care if you're offended? I started this talk out saying that abortion is one of the most controversial subjects that anybody has ever talked about. I spoke extensively about your need to control your emotions while you're in the middle of this conversation, and the only thing you brought to the mic was to tell me your emotional state towards what I said. I bothered you. So what? Do you have an argument against what I said? That's the question that you have to answer today. Can you demonstrate scientifically or philosophically that the unborn are not one of us? If you can do that, have at it. But short of that, getting up and telling me how you feel is pointless. How you feel, or any of us feel, does not matter. What they are and what we're doing to them does. And that's how we have to force this discussion to go. We can't allow it to become a matter of preference statements. We have to keep it on the moral question. And how do we do it? So now we're going to get into the part of this where we talk about how we argue. Now, I would say it was the start of this morning. It's like, Jay is going to teach y'all how to argue about this. And like I was going to do some complete thing. Let me be very clear. I one time spoke at Auckland University in New Zealand, and they gave me 7 hours to lecture. Not in a row. I mean, it was kind of in a row. I mean, there were breaks. And by the way, the audience stayed the whole time. I was so sick of hearing me talk by the end of it. I can't believe that they did. But even at 7 hours, you're barely scratching the surface of this subject matter. So what we're going to do is introduce you to an effective way to think about having conversations. And then I'll open up the floor for Q&A, and we'll see if after that you may have some other clarifying questions you might want to ask after that. So when I said the first thing that we do was the last of our ground rules. The ground rules were, the only way you can fail is to say nothing. Be calm, you're right. And we're arguing from the position that abortion is wrong. It's wrong because it unjustly takes the life of an innocent human being. And that's how we argue. We stay focused on one single question. What is the unborn? What is the embryo? What is the fetus? Is it one of us? Everything hinges on how we answer that question. Many years ago, Greg Kokel, the president of Stand to Reason, an apologetics organization out of California, was having lunch with my friend, my mentor, my former boss, Scott Klusendorf. And they were having lunch and talking about how we can demonstrate to people that this is the single most important question on this issue. What is the unborn? And so they said, Greg said, I've been thinking about this and I think I got it. He said, I think this works. He said, imagine you're your sink and you're washing dishes. And then into the room walks a young child. Now, my youngest child is now 16, but we'll age her back a little bit so that she's smaller at this point. So Nika walks in the room. I'm focused here, and Nika asked me this question. Daddy, can I kill this? Can I kill this, Daddy? Well, it's a weird question, but kids ask weird things all the time. What do I need to find out before I answer my child? What is it? That's important information. What do you have? Is it, I've talked earlier, I've verified, apparently you guys do not have palmetto bugs in Minnesota, but we do have them like down south in Georgia and Florida. If you don't know what a palmetto bug is, look it up online. It's a lovely thing. It's like a steroid cockroach. It's huge. And they live in the trees outside. They're not in your house very much, but every once in a while they'll sneak in because they like the air conditioning in the summer. And so you hear them before you see them. That's a lovely aspect of those awful things. So you're watching TV or having family time or just sitting around and all of a sudden you hear this little click, click, click. You're like, oh no. And at some point or another, they're come running across, and it is startling. Because I don't know if you're also aware about this with cockroaches or all roaches of the roach family. They are the fastest to scale land animal on Earth. Which meant that if you made a roach the size of a cheetah, it would destroy it in a race. To scale, they cover more ground faster than any other animal on Earth. So when that thing goes running across your floor, it's startling. So if Nika has one of those, kill it. Absolutely, destroy it. And Nika is a first-class bug catcher, by the way, has always been her entire life. I don't want to get the impression that my house is full of bugs or anything, but every once in a while in Georgia, there's a lot of them, and one gets in the house. And my son, my oldest, who is this giant of a man at 6'2", 230 pounds, has always been a lacrosse player, this great athlete. He would call me from the other room when there was a bug in it. It was depressing. I was like, son, a little part of my soul dies every time you do that. You know, be a man. Come on, grab that bug. Not Nika. Man, I would be working and doing something, and all of a sudden the whole house would shake. Boom! And I'm like, oh, I hope everything's okay. And then I would just hear her yell, got one! I was like, all right, Nika's on the job. And if she's got a bug, kill it. Destroy it. If it's the neighbor's cat, probably not. Right? I don't like that cat very much, but let's just hold off on that. You're kind of acting like a serial killer for wanting to. If it's one of her brothers or sisters, has she gotten into a headlock? Absolutely not. Let them go. What it is determines how we answer the question. Can we kill this? What is it? The problem is the overwhelming majority of people that we talk to in the world have never considered that question at all. They have staked out a position without any consideration for what that position means. Now, they give this away in how they talk. And as I was taught when I was younger, when I first started getting focused on this area, I was taught by Scott and Greg Kokel to say, ask myself this question. If somebody gives me a justification for abortion, and I ask myself, would they give this same justification if we were talking about killing a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old human being, somebody that we uncontroversially accept is like one of us? If they would never offer that as justification for killing them, then they have assumed that the unborn are the kind of thing that they're allowed to kill without arguing for it. And we all have to argue for our position. Let me give you an example of how we push back against this. I was speaking in San Diego. I was open to the floor, and it was a forum. The students weren't doing well. So a faculty member at the school where I was speaking stood up in the back when he got frustrated as he was deciding he was going to put me in my place, I guess. And he said, Mr. Watts, abortion must remain legal to protect the privacy rights of women. Now that's what Roe v. Wade, today's Roe v. Wade day. That's what Roe v. Wade said. Abortion had to be constitutional at the time under Roe v. Wade because it protected the privacy rights of women to get medical treatment without the interference of the state of their community. Now, the first thing that I do when somebody brings up an objection is not tell them that I think they're stupid, because that's not productive. As a matter of fact, I grant part of his premise with him. I said, sir, I'm a deeply introverted fellow. You may not believe that because I'm up here talking, but it's true. My whole goal in life is to sit in my chair, read books, and be left alone. But I come out here because this is the job that God called me to do. So I'm a deeply introverted fellow. I love privacy. I value privacy. I think privacy is important. I don't want to diminish the importance of what you've said. But, and I put my hand on my hip right here. I said, let's pretend for the sake of discussion right now that I have a 2-year-old little girl standing next to me. This 2-year-old little girl, let's say for the sake of our discussion, is my next door neighbor's daughter. And every night, in the privacy of their own home, her father viciously abuses her. Within the privacy of their home, her life is one abusive episode after another. I said, would it be okay with you if we empowered Child Protective Services as a community to go into that house, violate the privacy of that family, and take that child out to protect them from abuse? Well, what do you think he said? Yes, immediately, without hesitation, yes. So I asked this question, why? He said, what do you mean, why? And I said, why can you do that? And he said, because it's wrong. I said, so? It's a private matter. And he got really upset. He said, no, that's not how that works. I said, well, you said privacy. So I'm asking you, why are you allowed to violate the privacy of this family to protect that child? And he kept pushing back, getting angrier and angrier. And finally, as he got very frustrated with me because I kept saying, why can you violate their privacy? He said, Mr. Watts, because privacy is not a justification for the destruction or the abuse of human life. I was like, okay, I agree with you. So, if the unborn are human in the same way that this little girl is, then as much as we both value privacy, we both recognize that privacy has reasonable limits, limits that you define as when another human being is being abused. Our disagreement isn't over privacy. Our disagreement is over what is the unborn. I think that they're full members of the human family. I think that the embryo or fetus is like this young girl in important ways, and you don't. I will make my case for my position, and you will make your case for yours. You don't get to assume it. You have to demonstrate it. Do not let people off the hook. Make them make their case. We get so excited to tell other people what we think, we miss the opportunity to let them tell us what they think. And a lot of work can be done there. Another time I was talking to a Baptist pastor in Georgia. And I said, we were talking about abortion, and he said, can I ask you something, Mr. Watts? I said, sure, go ahead. If we get rid of abortion, what is your plan? What do you suppose that we do with all of the poor kids that we're going to have running around? Now, in my heart, I'm horrified that this is coming out of the mouth of a pastor. But I didn't let it show. I said, I understand your question, and I understand the importance of finding a Christ-like way to deal with poverty. Poverty is a terrible thing. And as Christians, we should be very sensitive to the needs of those around us. We have to love our neighbor as ourselves. Their needs should be my needs. And we should work cooperatively to deal with this. I said, but Pastor, imagine for a second that I have a 2-year-old little girl sitting next to me. And this 2-year-old little girl is the fourth of 4 kids. Ever since she's been born, her family has been under tremendous financial strain. The resources have been stretched. Her father has had to get another job. They are struggling. I said, Pastor, they are living paycheck to paycheck. They are one bad day away from things going terribly wrong for this family. Would it be okay with you, sir, if we killed this 2-year-old little girl to relieve their family of the financial burden that she's created for them? What do you think he said? No, of course not. So I asked again, why? He said, what do you mean, why? It's like, why can't we do that? He said, because it's wrong. I said, so it'll help them. It will help their family. And he said, and then we went back and forth because I wouldn't let him off the hook. I said, why is it wrong? And he said, because you cannot kill other human beings because they're expensive. And I said, I agree with you, sir. So if the unborn are like her, full members of the human family, then even though taking care of them might stretch our resources, we have to find a way. We have to find a better way to deal with poverty than killing poor people before they're born. We can do this. I have faith in us as human beings that we can love our neighbor better than that. So I'm not even making my case at this point, right? I've focused it on what is the unborn. I've put them into a moral case where they would get it in the right category. Don't talk about your feelings. Don't talk about emotions. And don't get to assume. Everybody has to argue. I'm going to argue that they matter. You're going to have to argue your point. But both of us have the responsibility and duty to do so. We have to get all of this out on the table. And let me tell you the work that can be done by letting people say their bad ideas out loud. Most of the time, I never even get to the point where I have to make my case. I remember one young man in California, he came up to me after I got done speaking, and he was so mad. And he was, how dare you? I'm like, what did I do now? He's like, how dare you be so inhumane as to tell a woman she has to be forced to give birth to a child that she doesn't want to. She has to be forced to remain pregnancy. How dare you be so inhumane as to take that position? I said, okay, when do you think human life matters? Tell me when you think it's wrong to take another human life. I just want to hear your view on this. And we talked for a moment, and he finally said, I think it's when they have rational capacities. I said, okay. Now, are you aware of, in this room, I don't know if you're aware of when we measure, first of all, one of the most difficult and poorly defined things in all of human psychology is rational capacities. We don't have the slightest idea what people are talking about and when they actually attain. But I can tell you one thing, by almost every definition that's offered, that doesn't happen until months after you're born. Sometimes up to 2 years, sometimes later than that, depending on how you want to define it. So I told him, there is not a single person based on any working definition of rational capacity that is fully rational at the time of their birth. So are you saying it's okay to kill newborns? And he said this, in order to be consistent with the view that I'm arguing, I have to say yes. And I told him, no, you don't. You can just change your view if it's terrible. But that's fine. Let's keep running with this. I said, let's say I put an onion on the table and a newborn baby on the table. And I take a knife, really sharp knife, and I cut straight through that onion. And I keep going straight through that child. Are you telling me, based on your arguments, that there's no moral difference between cutting up the onion and cutting up the child? And he said again, in order to be consistent with the views that I'm arguing, I think I need to say yes. Now, at this point, instead of pushing harder, I said, look, and this is what we call narrating the conversation. If I ever want to make sure that I'm fully understanding the person I'm talking to well, I go back and say, let's talk about what we've established so far so I can make sure that I'm accurately reflecting your view. And so I went back and I started to wait and said, when we first started this conversation, and his hand shut up. I said, what's up? And he said, hold on. I said, okay. And he said, when we first started this conversation, I called you inhumane. And I just said that there is no moral difference between cutting up an onion and cutting up a newborn child. And I said, yep, that's where we landed just now. And then he said, I got to go. He said, you got to go. I said, I don't want to upset you. I just want to have a respectful conversation. He said, no, it's not you. He said, I just heard myself saying the things that I believe. And I'm horrified, and I have no way to argue for them, and I just have a lot to think about. Letting them have the room to express themselves will sometimes do work that your own arguments will not. We're too eager to tell other people what we believe. The safest thing we can do to get people in a conversation is, tell me what you believe. I'm not going to argue against it right now. I'm going to ask clarifying questions if that's okay with you, but I know what I believe. I don't have to tell you that. I want to understand what you believe. And oftentimes when they hear them saying stuff over and over, people look at me, and the second something comes out of their mouth, they look back at me and say, yeah, that doesn't sound right, does it? I'm like, no, it does not. And good for you for seeing it. So that's the work we can get done before we make our case. So finally, before we go to Q&A, I'm going to make a brief case, right? Number one, and you hear people say, well, science demonstrates the unborn are human, and so that's the end of the abortion debate. That's not. You need a twofold attack. The first part of that is science. That from the moment that they come into existence, the human embryo is a full member of the human family. It is a whole, distinct, living human being. It's whole, distinct, and living. It is a whole, distinct human life from the moment it comes into existence. I used to carry around reams of paper from embryology textbooks, quotes from pro-choice philosophers. All of these people said that I could, and I still have some of it on my computer up here. I'd be happy to read you quotes from pro-choice philosophers and journalists affirming what I just said. The reason I stopped doing that was because a scholar by the name of Stephen Jacobs was at the University of Chicago, and he did his PhD thesis on when human life begins. He wanted to resolve the abortion issue, but instead of resolving it by coming up with clever arguments, he went to the public and he said, what would it take to resolve the abortion issue with you? And the overwhelming majority responded, demonstrate when human life begins. So he went back through questionnaires to all these people. He sent out to thousands and thousands of people. And he said, who would you trust to tell you when human life begins? And they all said, academic biologists by an overwhelming majority. So he sent out over 10,000 questionnaires to the most prestigious academic biologists in the world. He got more than 5,500 of them back, and 97% of them said that human life begins at the completion of the fertilization process. Once the fertilization has been done, we have a new life, a new organism. It is now the beginning of an independent, whole, distinct human life. As a matter of fact, the 3% who held out didn't hold out for biological reasons. They held out for political reasons. They sent hate mail. And by the way, the overwhelming majority of people who affirm that human life begins at fertilization, those academic biologists, they knew exactly what would happen with that information. So they tried to derail his PhD process and to get him kicked out of the University of Chicago because they had to answer a question of when life begins. That's how awful it is out there, how dishonest people are operating. But 97% of them affirmed that it begins at the moment of fertilization. Whole, not a part of anything else, distinct, unlike any cell in the body of its mother and its father, and alive. Meeting every single criteria, metabolizing, cellular reproduction, growth, all of these things so that you could say response to stimuli. It has it all from the moment it comes into existence. Science affirms that it's human life from the beginning. But we're not done there, because that's not what most people argue. As a matter of fact, almost every sophisticated pro-choice scholar I've ever talked to will affirm what I just said to you. So what are we arguing? Do they matter? We know they're human, but is it the kind of human life that matters? One of the things I've started doing in the last fall when I spoke at several smaller groups, much smaller than this, I would walk in, and I knew there was an opportunity for interaction, so I walked in and I asked this question: can we kill each other? Are we allowed to kill each other? Is it wrong for us to kill each other? Everywhere I've ever been, the answer is immediately, yes, that's wrong. No, we're not allowed to kill each other. And then some clever person in the room says, except, and then we talk about some very narrow times where it seems like, okay, if you believe in just war theory, or if you believe in self-defense, and these areas, but then the argument explodes in the room because not everybody agrees, and you also get this very narrow corridor of when we're allowed to kill one another. And after I get the room to define these terms for me, I then say, okay, now let's talk about abortion. And you can just see their hearts dropping. You just said it's wrong for us to kill each other. And you said that the only times are these very, very narrow places. So now you have a responsibility on your part. If you want to defend abortion, you have to either, one, defend the position that the unborn are not like us. They're not one of us. You have to prove that they're not one of us and they don't fall in that category of each other. Or number two, you have to make the case for justifiable homicide. Because that's what it is. And we just talked about how hard that bar is to reach. So good luck with that. In my mind, the greatest living pro-choice philosopher, Kate Griessley at University of Oxford, she has demolished that argument altogether, saying it can't possibly meet the standards of justifiable homicide. Those are set so high, if they're human, you can't kill them. That's just the way the world works. And she is both a legal and moral philosopher. So I ask that question, is it wrong? Now, if they want to make the case when I say, should we kill each other, and they say no, would it be objectively wrong for us to kill each other? Yes. And a lot of times I'll ask them another question. If it's a one-to-one conversation, I'll ask them this question. If I have a young man in front of me, a young woman in front of me that's pro-choice on a campus, I'll say, okay, what changed? If it's wrong for us to kill each other now, and we both agree on that, and we have common ground now, common moral ground, what changed? What changed from the embryo or fetus that you once were to the more mature life standing in front of me now? That if I killed you then, you were the kind of thing that couldn't be wronged. I could do anything that I wanted to you without having to explain it to anyone. There was no such thing as morally wronging you. You didn't have that kind of a status among humanity. But all of a sudden, something happens in your life or maturation process. And if I do the exact same thing to you that I could have done one day ago to you the next day, it's the worst thing that I can ever do to another human being. What accounts for that change? And just to give you a heads up for what we have to deal with, when I talk to people about equal dignity, the equal dignity of human beings, the intrinsic value of human beings, when we look at human life being abused all over the world, and we see a culture where some group is being treated poorly, we don't care what race they are. We don't care what religion they are. We don't care what government they live under. We look at some things that happen to other human beings and say, nobody should ever have that happen to them. No one should ever do that to another human being, which means wherever we ground that equal dignity of human rights that we're appealing to at that moment, it has to be something that is shared equally throughout our entire human family. Because race, religion, culture, government, borders, none of that matters when we talk about the violation of human rights. You just don't get to do that to other human beings. And so if we're looking for something that grounds that, we have to put it in something that we all equally share. And there is one thing that we all equally share, and that's our shared humanity. Stephen Schwartz said everything else falls into what we call the SLED acronym. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. And he says as important as all those things are, they don't do the philosophical work necessary to explain why I could kill you then, but I can't kill you now. Why I could do anything to you then, but now you're something that's morally important. Why I could do whatever I wanted, and suddenly the same thing is the worst thing we can do to another human being. Those other things don't give value, don't hold value. We don't look at big people and be like, wow, look how big that guy is. He is very valuable. It would be very wrong to kill that guy. Hopefully we don't look at small people in the same way. Level of development is another thing. They'll say there's some level of development that they need to reach, some maturation process, some capacity that they need to be able to have. But who told you that you were allowed to divide the human family up between those people that we cannot kill and those people that we can? And I was talking to those young kids this morning, and I said even more than that, because no human being has the authorization to tell me what human beings can and can't be killed. But we've also already agreed that it would be a great moral wrong if we kill each other. So if all of a sudden you're telling me we shouldn't kill each other, but we should be free to kill this guy over here. And if you're wrong, then that means by doing what you've told me to do, I've become a monster. So why should I ever trust that you have done a good job in dividing up the human family in that way? Size, level of development, environment is just where you are, and what you are is what makes you valuable, not where you are, and degree of dependence. I've mentioned many times my daughter, who's now 20, was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic at the age of 8. Prior to that diagnosis, she was the most independent little girl I've ever seen in my life. She climbed a huge climbing wall before she turned 4. She did it because I was stupid enough when she got up and failed about a third of the way up to say, you know what, I'm going to give you a long-term goal. If you ever get up that wall, I'm going to buy you whatever you want. And she turned around and put the harness right back on and went straight up the wall. And the guy that was belaying her as she was going up, he's like, Dad, you're about to be out a lot of money. And I'm like, why, man? She's only like halfway up. He's like, yeah, but the obstacle that she just went over is the toughest obstacle on this wall. She's going to the top. And she's like, bam, 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 got to the top, bam, hit this horn, rappels down, takes it off, looked straight in my eyes and said, we're going to the American Girl doll store. And I was like, and I was actually relieved. Because I was like, okay, I think I can handle that. Like, that won't bankrupt the family. I got to keep this promise. I'll buy you whatever I want. Whatever you want. So she was deeply, incredibly independent. Then all of a sudden, at 8 years old, she's diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. She's medically dependent on insulin for the rest of her life or until they cure diabetes. But more than that, she's dependent upon her family to help her grow up. Diabetics, it's not the high sugars that get them. It's the lows that kill them. Highs do damage over a long period of time. Lows kill them like that. And when they're kids and they're active and they're playing and they go to sleep at night, their blood sugar can just drop into death zone like that. Which means she couldn't sleep through the night without help from her family. She went from being wildly independent to being radically dependent on both medicine and community. But it didn't become a lesser offense to kill her. She didn't become morally less valuable as her dependence grew. As a matter of fact, as Christians, that's anathema to the teachings of Christ and Christianity. James 1:27 tells us that we are to go out among the widows and orphans, those who cannot take care of themselves. And that is religion that God accepts as pure. To sacrifice those for those who need us, those whose dependence is high and who we have no benefit from helping them other than the benefit of knowing that we please God in doing so. Go there. Not for the glory positions. Go help those who cannot help themselves. And then you are living in a place that pleases God. That is pure religion. So size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. I'll close on this and then I'll open it for whatever questions anybody has. I'll say this. Christopher Kaiser, a Catholic philosopher, said this. He said, all throughout human history, we have divided up the human family. We have said those are persons like us and those are others. And when we make somebody an other, we do unspeakably evil things to them. We kill them. We take their land. We dispossess them of their things. We hurt them and we abuse them. And he said, and every time we have morally matured to realize that we were wrong and that we should have never treated another human being like that. And then he asked this question, what are the chances that we're finally right? What are the chances that for the first time we have found a group of human beings that we are justified in abusing? That we are justified in having set apart? So it seems entirely more likely that we're going to morally mature through this and to come to a place where we realize we should have never, ever been doing this to another human life. So the things that I asked of you today, I said, number one, the only way you can fail is to say nothing. Number two, be calm. Be comforted because you're right and the truth is on your side. And number three, that we argue that abortion is morally wrong, not that we don't like it. We argue by focusing on the unborn, by making the case that the unborn from the moment they come into existence as an embryo are a whole distinct human life, and that what gives equal dignity, intrinsic value to all human lives is our shared humanity. And that things, capacities like size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, however important those things are in the SLED acronym, they can't do enough weight to explain why we could kill you then, but not now. The better answer is a more what we call inclusive view of human value. Every human life matters. And I include in that the people that I'm arguing with. I do not argue to win arguments. I use arguments to win people. Not just for the unborn, but for the lost who are trapped in a flawed view of the world. Because I know how much better it feels to live in accordance with the truth and love of Christ. And so they are the neighbors that I have to love as myself as much as the unborn are. They are not my enemies, not my antagonists. They cannot make me hate them. They don't get to have that from me. All they will get from me is to love them as I love myself. All right, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now. There's a microphone, I think, in the back. Oh, we got a microphone. We got floating mics. We got everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions? Could you come up, please, if you're able? Thank you.
Thank you very much, first of all.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate? So I've had conversations with people with the rape issue, the incest issue.
Yeah.
They 100% say, yes, it's wrong to kill another human being, but they're dead set on, yes, we have to have it for that because of the suffering of the person who may carry that baby with the memories and what has happened and whatnot. If you could elaborate on that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So we have to always differentiate between two different kinds of arguments. Thank you, sir. Arguments where they say it's not one of us, and where they say it's one of, and you're talking about the other one. It is one of us. It is a member of our family. But the violence and the moral evil that has been perpetrated against that woman is so great that we have to leave her the option of getting an abortion. And that's what I hear as far as most for people who may agree with me on everything, but that exception is important to them. So here's one of the things that I'd like to point out. Number one, we're talking about a case of great moral evil. And I want to make that clear every time I handle anybody asks me a question about rape. Number one, because I have no idea how many people in the room might have been victimized by rape. And so I want to make sure that they realize that I recognize the evil of what's happened to them. Too often we want to get to our arguments and not realize that some questions are not just a test for our answers, but a test of our humanity. And we can't lose that. And we can't lose the fact that there's a great moral evil that we're talking about. But when you're talking about the acceptance that the unborn are intrinsically valuable, so we're talking about bodily autonomy arguments, but reasons that we should be able to kill the unborn, even though they're one of us, because we have control of our body. In that particular case, a very narrow set of controls in the case of rape. So here's what I ask. Because if it doesn't grant the full humanity of the child, then it's just they're denying the humanity of the child. And then for them, really any reason to get an abortion, not just rape. But if it is this specific instance, I ask them, how many intrinsically valuable human beings do we have involved in a scenario where a child has been conceived and raped? Immediately they say 2, and I say keep going. 3, the rapist is morally guilty and should be justly punished for what he's done, but he is still an intrinsically valuable human being. So we have the rapist, the woman, the child. And I ask people this question, and I've asked audiences all over the world, how many people in this room support capital punishment, execution for rapists? Don't worry that the father's watching. Okay. By the way, it's much more in the South, but even in the South, it's a smaller number. It's something like a quarter of the room is what you're mostly going to get. About 51 to 52% the last time I checked the data of people in the United States are against capital punishment altogether for any crime. That number goes way up if you start to talk about rape. Most people do not believe that rape should be a capital crime. I'd be happy to talk about that later as to why I agree with that, but not here, somewhere else. So then I ask the next question. How many people think that the woman should be killed for being a victim of rape? No one has ever raised their hand to that question. And when I asked them why, they said, well, that would be morally monstrous. Why would that be morally monstrous? Because you cannot transfer the moral guilt of the rapist to her victim, to his victim, this innocent woman. He is guilty. She is not. How could we even have this conversation? I said, I agree with you. So now the next thing I have to ask the audience is, why, if most people do not want to kill the rapist who is actually morally guilty of the crime of rape, and nobody thinks that we should execute the woman because we think it would be monstrous to transfer the moral guilt of the perpetrator to the victim, why are we so comfortable talking about killing the third intrinsically valuable human being in this discussion, who is equally as innocent as the woman, who only exists for things that had nothing to do with them, and has no crime, has offended no other human being, has done nothing wrong? We're more comfortable talking about killing that third one than we are the rapist. Now, here's an interesting thing that happens when I say that. Number one, hopefully they start to feel the weight of that discussion. But what's often happened is somebody's looked back at me and said, you're right. I would like to go back and modify my answer now, and I'm now in favor of executing the rapist. And when they say that to me, I'm like, thank you. You have just given everyone who is in earshot a real-time demonstration of the way that abortion desensitizes us to the value of human life. In order for you to be able to salvage your right to kill a child, you have now decided to kill another human being who just moments ago you said you wouldn't kill. It changes us once we accept death as an answer, and we start to see it as an answer everywhere. Christopher Kaiser, who a Catholic philosopher I mentioned a moment ago, he said, there are moral evil actions that happen that take away good options. And all that we're left with is the morally heroic and the morally prohibited. We are required to ask that woman, with all the help that the community can muster to help her, to carry that child to term, and if necessary, then we'll place the child in adoption. And we recognize that this is a tremendous imposition if she doesn't want to have the child. But because of the moral evil of the man, all good options have been eliminated. We have two, the heroic and the prohibited. And I cannot tell any other human being that they're allowed to take the second. Does that help at all? All right, thank you. Yeah, okay, great. I think she was next, and then you guys. Okay, good. Yeah, you, right there. Yes, ma'am.
Again, thank you. I am taking away a lot of what you're saying. But I'd like to just share that there's another element that needs to be addressed. I've worked in a pregnancy center for 10 years. Yeah. And I saw a shift in the thinking of women. And the shift was so drastic that in the beginning we would talk about the human life of the baby, what the embryo is, blah, blah, blah. You know, we go into the science. But toward the end of my 10 years, women would come and say, I know it's a baby. I know it's human life. I can't have it. We'd have women come in who have 3 kids. You brought up that example. And say, I can't afford a 4th one. It's this element, it's this attitude that we're having that we need to address, that they know to some degree the science. But there's something within the element of the human heart that we're losing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And let me tell you something. I say that they've never thought about it and they can't articulate their position, but I would also tell you that I believe in my heart, and I think that Scripture speaks to this, that they know by the testimony of their own conscience that it's a life that has value.
Right.
So what I do with I talk about people is we're going to remove all of the excuses and make them say what it is that they actually believe, which is that they just don't want the next generation to be born because it would get in the way of their life. And you're right, that insensitivity is growing, but that's because we've left them no place to hide. Because for decades now, great philosophers and great arguers have been out there laying waste to all of their excuses. Until we get to the point where Catholic philosopher and scholar Robert George says they're just going to have to come out and admit they want abortion. They know exactly what it is and they want it. And that is where we're largely getting to today. They're demonstrating a huge insensitivity. Now, let me encourage you, as awful as that is, and I was just talking to some of the Students for Life representatives this morning, and they said the most popular thing that students like to do now is if you have one of those little models for like an 8 or 12-week embryo sitting out, these college students will try to show how cool they are by walking up and eating them in front of them to show that they're willing to devour the next generation as a point of pride of how insensitive they are about the loss of that life. But I'm telling you, if that's where they're going to, honestly, then we have a great opportunity to represent the kingdom of Christ in our culture, in our community, because most people still find that view repellent. Do you know how I know that? Because I see the polling every single time abortion is no longer hidden and is out in front of everybody, and they see how it happens, or they see pictures, or they see descriptions, and once it's out in front of everybody, the nation gets horrified and the polls swing for a little time. It's only in the darkness that the evil of abortion flourishes. So you're right. Ultimately, they have to admit it's their selfish desire to live as they want to live that drives them to destroy a life that they know in their hearts is human. And that's a terrible truth, but we need to understand that that's the world that we're reaching out to, and then we have to be prepared to make our case that human life ought to be treated with dignity and respect at every stage, and I genuinely believe that that will make a dent and an impact in this society. If we can just get this more polarized. I had one guy stand up one time, and he was telling me, oh, I don't believe in objective moral values. I don't believe in right and wrong. I don't believe there's any such thing as objectively wrong things that we can do to other human beings. And I said, great. Now argue that. Take that out into the public and make that case. Stop trying to hide it in all of the philosophy that you're trying to hide it behind, and just be honest about what you are. And then let us now have an honest conversation out in front of everybody and let them see the grace and mercy of Christianity that we can bring to the conversation, juxtaposed against the selfish intolerance of people who just want to serve in that area as far as their own selfish needs. If that's what they genuinely believe, then let's have the fight there. Because it's going to be the same. We still have to make the same case. They're one of us, and they matter. They're one of us, and they matter. And the hardest part is, and I've worked in pregnancy center for 3 years before I got involved in this aspect of things. And I talked to a young lady earlier. Most of the conversations we have no urgency. That does. At a pregnancy center, at a sidewalk counselor, there's an urgency that's not everywhere else because there is a life hanging in the balance. And so the best we can do is tell them the truth. And know that we cannot stop people from doing horrible things. But like every pregnancy center, I'm sure yours is the same as the ones that I've dealt with, the doors are open for them afterwards as well. When the guilt consumes them and they feel the weight of what they've done, we welcome them back. Not I told you so, not we warned you, but be restored. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I kind of have a sort of a similar question.
Okay.
The word that comes to mind, I think we've been hearing a lot more, is this idea, just very hardened hearts out there, women who are maybe just activists in the pro-choice, movement, and they call the unborn parasites, and they call it, oh, this is self-defense, because they argue, well, you're okay with killing in the case of self-defense, right?
Yes.
Well, they see this as self-defense and a future self-defense of their livelihood. And so I guess just sort of, it's a similar question of like, not maybe with the woman coming, who has a child in her womb, but the women who are kind of shouting the abortion and just saying, abortion all day, every day. I actually came from a similar kind of turnaround story as you, where I worked in a women's center, so-called, on a university, and I was kind of brought in as someone who really cared about human trafficking issues.
Yeah.
And then I got pulled in and sort of, well, you believe in, women shouldn't be raped and all this. Well, you should also agree with these other abuses of women, which they treated as life, being able to grow life as a hindrance on women. These really just, I don't know. I guess my question is, around this idea of calling life parasites.
I'll split it into two.
Yeah,
I'll deal with the parasite first, and then I'll kind of broader answer after the fact.
Yeah.
Okay, so number one, I've heard this a lot. A lot of this, what's a parasite, so I have the right to get it out of my body. I was actually talking to some people about this earlier today, and I did some work on this on our website with a podcast and some shorts. Here's the thing: it doesn't meet any definition of a parasite. I mean, it's not, and it's easy to demonstrate. Number one, it's the same thing. It's just the reproductive act. So, I mean, it is a child. And now, I stay away from baby. I don't use the word baby, but it is by definition a child. It is the immediate biological progeny of its parents. That is the definition of a child. It is a child. So it's the same species. It is the child of the mother. But here's some other reasons that it doesn't meet the criteria to be a parasite. Parasitic relationships are all one way. The parasite only takes from the host. Now, one of the reasons that they're going to try to muddy the waters on the parasite conversation, if they're a little bit smarter than the average bear, is they're going to say, hey, what happens early on is the placenta is going to try to mask its presence from the immune system of the woman so it doesn't know it's there, so that it can establish itself, which, by the way, parasites do. And so it's behaving like a parasite. And that is somewhat true, that in what they call the inflammatory stage of abortion, of pregnancy, the placenta does mask its presence. It does act like a parasite in that sense. It needs time to get itself settled in. But then you move into what's called the anti-inflammatory stage of pregnancy, where the placenta starts working in cooperation with the woman's body. And there are episodes where there have been health issues inside the woman that have been alleviated somewhat during pregnancy, because when the body senses that there's problems there, it borrows from the placenta stem cells of the child that go into maybe the heart or the kidney or somewhere else, and it does a little bit of repair damage, which means that we can find cells from the child in a woman for the rest of her life after she's had the child, when that sort of thing has happened. Parasitic relationships don't work like that. The parasite never helps the host. This is just human reproduction. And in a broader sense, and that's why I want to point back to Kate Greasley. If you have any appetite for both reading a pro-choice person and scholarly work. Now, two Catholic philosophers, Frank Beckwith and Christopher Kaiser, have both written books, Defending Life and The Ethics of Abortion, respectively. And I would recommend that you read chapter 6 of both of those books, because oddly enough, chapter 6 works on bodily autonomy rights and comes up against all this. Both of them have done a fantastic job of answering these kind of objections. But Kate Greasley's pro-choice. And when Kate Greasley, as a legal philosopher, says the bar for justifiable homicide is crazy high for a reason. And if the unborn are human, then killing them is justifiable homicide. It's not suicide. It's not death by natural causes. It's not an accidental death. There's only so many ways people die, and that puts it in the category of homicide. And so she says it's justifiable homicide if they're one of us. So destroying them, if you accept that they're one of us, has a crazy high criteria. And she said the problem is that pregnancy may be weird. It may be so weird that there's no natural analogy to it, but it also is just the way that every human being has ever come into existence in all of human history. And I had one person that was going on and on about the dangers of pregnancy, and Lucas said, if I concede to all of that, will you just calm down and recognize that your mom did this? I was like, every mom did this. So if I concede that all of these risks are real, can we also just concede that every human being you have ever met came into existence through this process? The idea of trying to transform morally pregnancy into this attack on the woman is repellent. It's taking the means by which all of us have come into existence, and suddenly, and this is coming from the mouth of a pro-choice philosopher. She's like, it's outrageous to try to cast this new life that has come into existence the way all human life who's ever existed has, as an aggressor, as a rapist, as a parasite, as an attempted murderer, that you're defending yourself. So that just doesn't morally hold. So it's not a parasite because it doesn't meet any of the criteria to be a parasite, and it's a child. And human reproduction does have its dangers, as is everything that we do in life. But it also is just the way everybody comes into existence, ever. Is that helpful at all? Yeah. Okay, all right. The last question? All right.
I'm trying to phrase this in such a way that take it a different direction.
Okay.
The fetus is not going to be viable. How do you help share that information and what to do?
Okay, so you mean there's some sort of physical or biological abnormality that means that there's no chance
That's right.
that the fetus will be born. Okay, so what do we do?
That's where I'm coming
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. And is that it?
That's it.
Okay, good. Okay, all right. So this is a great one to land on. Thank you. It's a great one to end the night on. Because it's important for us to understand that, when we're going back to rape as well, that I understand that there are such things as hard questions. Meaning that there are commitments that I make morally to other human beings, and there will be threshold issues that are difficult to deal with. And that's true for my views. And this is one of those that is terribly hard. Number one, I don't like the term viable, because we have a really difficult time in diagnosing accurately, oftentimes, the unborn. And so if we just accept that if a doctor says it, then we ought to abort it, that's a dangerous place to be. And I'll tell you why. I have a friend of mine, and she's given me permission to share this about her family. One of her children, when they found out, when they did the amniocentesis, because she was older, so they wanted to do that, and she had it checked, and they said, there's just problems. There's just so many problems. The child appears to already have cancer. They have development issues. They're going to be miserable for the rest of their life. They may not even live long. The thing that we should do now is destroy the child before it's born. Get the abortion. Out of mercy, destroy it before it's born. Catherine was born. And everything that they said about her was true. She's had a life of cancer, heart disease, immuno issues. She has more surgeries than any person I've ever met. She's now in college, by the way. But here's the thing that was missed by those doctors. She's happy. And her family loves her. My wife was playing with her one day, and she stepped into when she was younger, stepped into a creek, and she looked up to everybody there, and she said, "My pants are wet. This is the worst day of my life." And my wife said, "Didn't you just have open heart surgery like last week?" And she said, "Yeah, but that happened at Children's Hospital, and that place is awesome." We have to be careful. Now, there are cases that we're going to lose. But we have to be careful about how we deal with people whose lives are not what we think they ought to be. Because we do this already with children with Down syndrome before they're born. In the United States, they're aborted somewhere between 60 to 80% in the United States, depending on what part of the country you live in. Fewer in the South, fewer in the Bible Belt, more in other parts of the country. Iceland, it's almost 100%. It's 100% if you're in the country of Iceland. If they diagnose you with Down syndrome, you're aborted. About 90% in Great Britain. But there's been a book written, I can't remember the exact name of it. It's by a pro-choice philosopher who has a child with Down syndrome that wrote a book that said, choosing Down syndrome. And he gives us statistics. 99% of people with Down syndrome are happy with their life. 98% of people who have children with Down syndrome say they're proud of their child and are happy to be their parent. 96% of their siblings say having that child in their life has made them a better person. Good luck getting that statistic on a normal sibling relationship. It's just so hard. And so we know that there's going to be issues that come up where we have answers that will never be satisfying to people who are looking for easier answers. When we say, look, we have neonatal hospice. We can come together around you as a community, let the child be born, hold it till it dies, love it while it exists. Maybe the greatest thing you ever get to do is to let that child know for the moment that it lived that it was loved and welcomed into the community. But that's a hard answer. That requires us to be better than we are. But you know what? I love that about Jesus. I love that there is zero wiggle room. You love them. No matter what. No enemies, no bad guys. All of them are desired to get the mercy of Christ. And even the unborn that have no future, and we can see no path for them, we love them. And one of the saddest things I've ever seen, Peter Singer, who I haven't mentioned tonight, but I mentioned in a lot of talks, he thinks that abortion's great. He also thinks that we should be free to kill children after they're born. He thinks that we should have a period of time after a child is born in case some genetic disease presents itself so that we can have them taken back to the hospital and have them painlessly and mercifully killed and then get on to having the next child. And all throughout his time of publicly advocating for this position, he keeps trying to come up with conditions where it'd be better for somebody to be dead than alive. And every time he does that, the people who have that condition speak up and say, I'm fine being alive, thank you. It's not that my life is not without challenges. So finally, he found one that he thought could not possibly be desired for anybody to have it. I can't remember the exact name of it. I used to know it off the top of my head, but it's the paper skin disease. It's where your skin is so fragile that the people who live with it are in constant pain. Every day, they have to have treatments that cause them agonizing pain. Their growth is never going to be on a normal trajectory. Their lives are going to be different. They're going to require help all of the time. And Peter Singer, at the same time, he finally chose this as his example. At the exact same moment, providentially, a video went viral of a young 15-year-old boy who has that disorder. And his community bought him and his family a new house and provided him with everything that they needed to take care of him. And that young man and his father were doing an interview. And they asked the father if it was hard being his father. And he gets so angry immediately at the question. He's my son, and I love him. And the boy just immediately hugs his dad. And they asked him if it was hard. And he said, of course it's hard. And there's pain and there's suffering. But do you know what I've found out since I started sharing my story? That there's other people out there like me. And they see inspiration in our family. And they reach out to me. And they tell me that knowing that I'm here makes them happy. And he says this, if everything that I've been through in my life was so that those people could feel better, then it was worth it. That's a kind of love that makes us all better. It elevates the human experience. I would rather have hard issues that require me to love my neighbor more than to be ashamed of the view that I hold and to tell people, okay, in that instance, go ahead and do it. Yes, I admit there are going to be times where the world is not going to be satisfied with my answer. But my answer, the pursuit of loving our neighbors ourselves, God's answer for how we deal with our community, elevates us all into something better, better versions of ourselves. And that's exactly what the hardest things ought to do. They shouldn't be the places where we look for easy answers. They should be the places where we look for deeper community commitment and love. That's all I got for tonight. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time.
If I could just have you wait for a second here. I just want to remind everybody, first of all, thank you all for coming and remind you that there is hospitality out there graciously provided by the Epiphany community. As just one closing thought that just occurred to me, we know that God chose to, it seems like daunting for us Christians right now in this culture of death, but we know that God chose to to bring the first Christians into existence in a Roman culture where they literally let their unwanted newborns exposed on the hill and to be exposed to the elements or killed by wild beasts. And it seems to me that one of the main factors that Christianity took off from was the Christians sneaking out in the middle of the night, taking these infants in and nurturing them, really changed their culture. And I think we are presented with a similar opportunity. So I'm delighted that all you came, and I hope you've gotten a lot out of this. This was recorded. It will be on the Epiphany website. I'm not sure exactly where or how, but I think you can, there's a lot to cover, and that was covered, and hopefully, if you're interested, you can go back and have a second go at it. So thank you once more.